Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Christy Mazelman, and I'm the Executive Director at Cultural DC. I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening for what I know will be a fantastic conversation between Baltimore-based artist Zoe Charlton and curator Jessica Stafford Davis. For those of you that don't know or haven't seen, Zoe's exhibition Rendition opened at Cultural DC's Mobile Art Gallery in early February at Union Market. And again, if you didn't get a chance to see that, I would urge you all to pop over to Cultural DC's website at some point and check out a really rad 3D tour that Zoe narrated for us. It is the coolest thing since sliced bread, and it's great. It's super informative. So if you haven't seen that, you should definitely check it out. But I know both of these fine ladies are going to be talking all about the work tonight. Tonight, so just to give you guys a little bit of logistics on how this works, these fine ladies are going to jump in and chat for 30 to 40 minutes, and then we are going to take some questions. We're going to do that through the chat feature on Zoom. So over the course of the evening, if you have questions, please just use the chat feature, and then at the end of the chat, we will kind of pull some questions for Zoe and Jessica. So Zoe Charlton is again, a Baltimore-based artist. She creates drawings and collages, installations, and animations. She does it all. And sculpture, I have to add that in, you left that out. Using the nude body often of Black women, she depicts her subjects' relationship with their world by combining images of culturally loaded objects and landscapes with undressed bodies. She received her MFA degree from the University of Texas at Austin and participated in residencies at ArtSpace San Antonio, McCall Center for Art and Innovation, the Skowhegan School of Painting, and the Patterson Residency at the Creative Alliance. Her work has been included in numerous national and international exhibitions. She is also the co-founder of Syndicate, an artist project space in Baltimore, Maryland, and is a counselor on the Maryland State Arts Council. Zoe is also an assistant professor at the Department Associate, sorry. Oh, sorry.
Don't take that away from me.
I know, I would never. I'm just like, yeah, I would never. So Zoe is an associate professor in the Department of Art at American University in Washington, D.C. And we are thrilled to have her here, along with Jessica Stafford Davis, who is the founder of Agora Culture. One second, I can't see my. And Art on the Vine. She is a lover of the arts and focuses on making arts accessible, which we love at Cultural DC. She also serves on the National Board of Art Table and the Advisory Council for George Mason University School of the Arts. She has been featured in Forbes, International Review of African American Art, and Good Morning Washington. So welcome, ladies. We're thrilled to have you here this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. I'm really excited to be here and Zoe, to start this conversation with you. While we were anticipating that we would be doing this in person, I'm really excited that technology has lent space where I can give you a virtual hug and we can start. You know, this is a really precarious time, and it's a lot going on. Mm-hmm. And with COVID-19, and I just want to take a quick moment before we do start and just honor and acknowledge Dr. David Driscoll, who passed on April 1st from COVID. And Dr. Driscoll, as you know, was an amazing scholar, historian, and artist, and just an amazing, amazing man. And so I wanted to take a moment to talk about him for a second. I remember having him come to my home for a arts dinner with Elia Abba and her supper club. presentation, and we had artists and scholars and collectors around the table, and Dr. Driscoll was there, and you were there
I
as
remember that.
well.
Yes,
Yes.
yes. To see Dr. Driscoll that night, it was, and we've talked about this before. He showed up at everything and was supportive of everyone. And what a great role model to have, right? As an artist and academic, as an artist scholar, I really do look towards him and what he did. He created community. He built community. He was
And
amazing.
and in many instances, he was probably the most important person in the room, but
Yeah.
yet he was always gracious and humble and accessible, and just love that about him. And he was very inspiring to me. And I was wondering, are there other artists or other art historians that inspire you?
Yes, definitely. I studied with the late Ed Love when he taught at Florida State University, and he was really my introduction to the art world and being an artist. And I will forever value his mentorship. Um, and Also Maurice Berger, who passed away 2 weeks ago from COVID-19 related complications. I remember his memoir that was published the year I graduated with my MFA degree, and it literally changed my thinking. And I was working with images related to Blackness and whiteness, and so it was really powerful. And also, it's so interesting when you have, when there's a scholar that comes in and out of your life through what they produce, what they write. And in 2003, when I accepted my position at American University, um, his show opened it was called Whiteness and Race in Contemporary Art, I believe, and it opened up at UMBC, and that was a transformative show in my own learning and trajectory as an artist. The third person is Joyce Scott.
Yeah, we love Joyce.
I love Joyce, and Joyce epitomizes what it means to be an artist that is truly invested in her community and her family and her students, and in her practice. Joyce is amazing. Yeah.
Yes, she is. She's pretty phenomenal. Those are artists. I wonder, are there any other people in your life who have inspired you? Family members, maybe?
Yeah, the work that I've been making over the last 5 or so years has largely been about my family, and in particular about my grandmother's life. And so that's been really exciting to me to just build bodies of work around her, definitely around her. And with that said, I'm going to actually share my screen. Let's see how smoothly this goes. Aha! Yes,
Aha.
we did it.
Perfect. You're on. So Zoe, this blue house, what is this home, and what does it mean to you? And if you can kind of start from there and
Yeah, this is
your family.
So this is the homestead. This is my grandmother's house, or this was my grandmother's house. She started purchasing property in northern Florida, in the panhandle of Florida, in the 40s. The story is that she and her husband and some kids traveled from Havana, Florida to Tallahassee, Florida, for a better life, a different life. And they ended up sharecropping on this land, this acreage, and started building this house. And this house is really interesting because it served as a meeting ground. It's served as, the place that people went to go live when they needed a place to live. when they were in trouble or not in trouble, just needed a space to be, a safe place to be. It was a place that, you know, her members of her church would all gather, and it was also the place where we had all of our family reunions, our extended family reunions. But this house is really, it's iconic. It's symbolic of how I think about a homestead and how I think about family. And this house really keeps coming back into my work so many times. And, you know, whether it's drawn or it's built, etc. Yeah.
This home, when I see it, it's very reminiscent of my story, and I think a lot of other, you know, African Americans, when they think of that home that they would go to in the South, like to their family, to the root where it all began, like a refuge, if you will.
Yeah.
So this is your grandmother with her children that we're seeing?
With her kids, or some kids, so that's my grandmother. Her name is Everlina. I'm her namesake. And at the other end is one of my aunts, my late aunts. Yeah, so this is on the property. And they cleared this property, planted on this property. I mean, she was shooting squirrels and possums and skunks and making stew out of everything. So yeah, so that is her. And this is another porch family photo. And this is all of my aunts and uncles. And you can see this aunt right here. You notice that her foot is clipped off because she was MIA at this reunion. And I had some cousins that inserted her in. So this was really great.
Power of technology.
Power of technology, talk about it, right? So this is my grandmother at the end, and at the other end is my grandfather, Alex. And they had a total of 10 children, 9 of which grew to adulthood. And that's my mother, right next to my grandmother, who was the baby of the family. And the woman at the very end next to my grandfather is the oldest child. And she turns 96 this summer.
Oh my God, what a blessing.
Yeah, yeah.
I love hearing about your grandmother. And I want to transition quickly to the work that was recently acquired by the Phillips Collection.
Yeah.
The Country, a Wilderness Unsubdued.
Yes, The Country, a Wilderness Unsubdued. And I'm going to turn this back on to get back into that. This piece I am so excited that the Phillips Collection has this. It is the first one in this larger series. And there are probably about 6 or 7 of these large scale collages. But I thought, my intention was to create a body of work where there was this landscape, a landscape that made me think of my grandmother's property, the kind of density of the forests that were around her, all the trees, all the foliage, all the birds that were flying through it. What's missing here is the kudzu. And it doesn't snow in northern Florida. You know, it's probably the amount it snowed in the last 20 years might be twice, but and that was a dusting. But my goal was to create this kind of density that I always thought about, you know, when I think about home or the homestead. And all the titles from this series of work are taken out of Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech. And so every time I read that, it makes me think about my grandmother, the sheer sort of bravery and the audacity and the nerve to exist in the way that she did, right? Which I think is really powerful.
It is certainly powerful. And I know I had shared with you briefly that I have had the distinct honor to write for the Phillips Collection's Centennial Catalog. And we had the opportunity to respond to a piece in their collection, and I selected this work. And what was very interesting to me is how I read the work, and then how I read the work after learning about your grandmother. Mm-hmm. So when I first read the work, it seemed like this body of a woman, a Black woman, a woman who felt like me, right? Ample thighs, a little belly, but yes, to the belly, and having things growing and flourishing from her. Mm-hmm. And there's so much density to her. There's so much density to the branches and the leaves that are and branches that are covering her, that you can't even see her face. And for me, that felt initially like a burdening. Here you are carrying people, things are growing and manifesting from you and thriving from you, but it's like so much to carry, right? Mm-hmm. But after hearing about your grandmother, which is so aspirational, I see the word differently. Mm-hmm. Here you have a woman in the 1940s in the South, creating space, owning land, building community. You mentioned that she had to be very resourceful in the ways that she was able to not only purchase the land, but to maintain it over time. You talked about sharecropping the land. Even she sold soup to others. Like, I was just so inspired by a story, which I usually don't typically think of, is a Black woman in the South making these strides. And so, again, and then I love the birds, this like releasing from the top of the work. And I made the connection of generations untold benefiting from the ingenuity of your grandmother, and not just her own bloodline, but those even outside of her, being able to grow from this.
Yeah, definitely. And my family, especially my mother's side, it was a matriarchal family. Women ruled. Thinking back to the photo of my grandparents and their kids, they're all women in that family. There were only 3 boys. And so it's really amazing when you have that growing up and you see that, right? You see that in practice. And, especially at a time when, especially now, when many of us, all the women that I know, are working in some capacity. And, when we sit around and we're talking about the patriarchy, right? And I think back to my family and the way that my grandmother ran her house. It was all about the women in her house.
Yeah. No, I think we don't see that a lot. There are a lot of stories that are covered. And I think that from a personal standpoint, when I think about what I want my children to see, because seeing is very important. I think that visual space and how we occupy these spaces, what people actually see, is very important. I know we had talked a little bit about why I collect what I collect, what hangs on the walls in my home. And I know growing up for me, I did not have I don't remember, just in case my parents are on this call, I don't remember seeing a lot of art hanging in the home. It was a lot of mirrors, right? I remember mirrors, but I don't remember seeing myself so much on the walls in my home. And for me, after having exposure later in life to works and the possibilities of seeing myself and others like me, it was very important for me to see stories that could enlighten me. And especially for my children, I needed them. I have 2 Black boys. I needed them to be able to see themselves and other people who look like them in a positive light, and for them to see different stories in a positive light. And so I know that has been very important for me. I wanted to get a sense from you as far as like visual culture, visual language, since you definitely deal with the Black body. How do you navigate that space?
So it's so interesting to hear you talk about the kinds of images and objects that were in your house growing up. My parents had a lot of knickknacks. My dad was in the service, and so they traveled. They went to a lot of different countries, particularly in Asia and in Europe. And so we had a lot of like cultural objects in the house, but we didn't have, so they were sculptures of like animals and like knickknacks of, tiny figurines. And other than that, we just had photos of family in the house. So there weren't any paintings or photos of paint or posters of paintings or anything like that. So we had objects, but we didn't have what I might consider art in the house. And so that was a really curious thing. And we didn't go to museums or galleries or anything like that growing up. But when I started studying art, the first thing that my mother did was go and buy as many art books as she could, and to point out different paintings or drawings or sculptures that she thought were interesting to look at. But I didn't have things like this in my house. So it's really interesting. I think a lot about occupying space. I think that I occupy a lot of space. I occupy a lot of space by the sheer fact that often I'm the only one that looks like me in a room. And so, and I think that whether it is said, it's stated or not, that occupies the space in people's minds and in their consciousness. And I think that, often being the only one or the only Black woman in a room, or one of 3 Black women in a room that is predominantly like non-Black, says a lot, speaks a lot. And so I always want to make sure that I participate in ways that make me visible and make me heard. It's important that we are heard and seen. Yeah. And so to that end, this idea of occupying space and occupying space, whether it's physically in a space or even how we're represented in a space, has been very, very important to me. It's been important to me to make images of Black women or Black men and have them large and on walls, etc. And I think
talking about large and on walls, this work here is currently at the Eaton Hotel. It's a permanent installation declared and proclaimed the Black Settlers' Homecoming. Can you talk a little bit about the process of creating this work? You worked in a different medium here.
Yeah. Oh man, I am so excited about this piece. And this was installed in 2018. So at the Eaton Hotel in downtown DC, and mad props to Sheldon Scott. Sheldon Scott,
Yes,
yay, love Sheldon. Sheldon invited me to create a piece specifically for this space, for this hotel. And it's located in Wild Days, which is on the very top in the top floor, the roof.
the rooftop.
The rooftop. And it's a really exciting piece to me. So the title is Declared and Proclaimed, the Black Settlers' Homecoming. And I had a smaller collage, a drawing that I had done, and it had a different figure in it. And it was actually an image of a white man on a hobby horse. And I wanted to make a piece where there was this kind of sliding landscape off the shoulders of a figure. And we had been going back and forth between different kinds of images, different kinds of things that this piece could say. And at one point, we were talking and I said, there needs to be a different body here, especially if it's going to be in this location, permanently on this wall, at this kind of point in DC, and to speak to the different communities in DC that I belong to. And so I wanted there to be a Black woman in this who is holding up this landscape, who is holding up this land, and also holding it up deliberately so that it's precarious, so that everything that's in it is just sliding off. The mask that she's wearing is from Liberia. It's attributed to the Lomatoma. And I was thinking also about Liberia and Liberia's independence and how formerly enslaved people were taken back to Liberia and all the politics involved in that. And the more I thought about what it means for people to return to go back to a place or occupy space, I always think about the role of Black women as ones who create culture, support land, build families, build communities, etc. And so it was really important that she occupy this kind of space, especially in this building.
Do you mind if we go so we can see a little bit more of the details?
Yeah. So here are some details here, and this is the detail of the house that is sliding out of the landscape, and then a detail of the mask. And so this is all mosaic. So they're like 1/4-inch glass tiles. So I worked closely with Sicci's in New York. It's the art factory. They have the place that they sort of produce all of this is in Italy, and it was an amazing process to see this collage be translated into a digital file, which then ended up being translated into this, which was phenomenal. And there was one point where the piece was getting ready to go onto the wall. And apparently there's this like little guy, this old guy that walked up to it without any measuring tapes, without any level, and said, "This wall is uneven. The whole thing has to come down. You have to rebuild the wall in order to put this on there." And I was so excited. I was like, who is this guy? I need to meet him. And I was really excited that he treated the piece with so much respect and regard, even before it was installed. Mm-hmm.
It is stunning. For those of you who are on the call, I definitely recommend if you have not already, make sure you make a pilgrimage to Eaton Hotel to see this fantastic work there. So just make sure that this is one of the pilgrimages you must make in your lifetime. Um, also,
right on.
right on. So I want to ask you, you then transitioned to work with African masks before we get there, excuse me. Let's keep going. This is the homestead.
This is the homestead. And you know what? It looks like there's something out of order, but we'll do this. This is the homestead. So the house that was at the very beginning, I was an artist in residence at Art Pace in San Antonio. And this piece was originally commissioned by them. It is a half-scale model of my grandmother's house. And I called 3 generations of cousins who have either passed through that house in some way, whether they lived there or they were there every weekend helping, etc. And we sat down and I was redrawing the layout of the house from memory. And there was an original version of it, which was a quarter scale that was made, and this one is half scale. And so I worked with artists and builders in San Antonio to make this. And on the inside of the house are these tiny model train houses that are painted in the exact same color with glitter roofs. And so when the light hits it, they glow. So it's turned upside down because when my grandmother passed, her children all sold the property. And they sold the property to a developer who built a gated community on that land. And it's a really strange experience going back down the street where my grandmother lived and seeing these massive live oak trees and knowing that the house is supposed to this house was sitting at the very bottom of this steep hill, and to see a gated community on that property. And this is an example of it in a gallery. So it's so that you can really see the scale of it.
It's tremendous. I love the story of the land, and unfortunately, it's no longer in your family. But it makes me think about the similarities of multiple stories of having land and then having to forgo it for a myriad of reasons, as far as like when we talk about like generational wealth moving from generation to generation. And so when you're talking about having to, your family having to sell the land, those are the things that first come up for me.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. I have a house, but I don't have land. I don't own land. And I think it would be amazing to own land like that, property like that. We're all looking, I think many of my friends are looking out in the country and seeing what they can do in the next 5 years to kind of get away from the city. And I think that is an amazing thing to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so here again in this piece, this is called Meant for the Homebred, and it's the same house turned upside down.
Again, with the woman figure as its base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about occupying space. Like, I want these figures to occupy space. This house does too. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the transition into more formally the African masks into your practice. I know a lot of times when the works on paper and the collages that we were seeing, when you sit with the work, you can see, you continue to see more things present themselves. And a lot of times they are African masks included in those collages. But if we transition a little bit into more formally working with the sculpture masks.
Yeah, I was making all of these drawings and collages with African masks on the women. And I was using them fairly just kind of generically. I was really looking at, responding to many different works of art throughout history, one of which is Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. And as I was putting these masks on the different women, I was thinking about ideas of power and empowerment and gender roles, etc. But I hadn't been looking at them specifically. After making a handful of drawings with the women in these masks, a dear friend of mine, Veronica Jackson, loaned me the masks in her collection, and these are all from her. These are all hers. And I thought, well, let me just take these on their own terms. Like, what would that mean if I just made work about them? And it moved me into printing out images of the masks and physically making them. And around the same time, I was starting to think about these larger installations or drawing installations that I could make with them. And this is actually one of the latest ones that I've done. And it is called Looking Hopefully for Life. And this is right now at Seagram Mall, this gallery, which is under lockdown, like the Cultural DC show. But the more I did that, the more I started thinking about the actual statues, and especially the African statues that occupied a lot of space. And I was thinking about this series, this grouping of statues or statues like this, and this is attributed to the Bangwa in Cameroon. But like these masks, I knew nothing about them. And so working with the actual objects, these actual masks, required that I study where they're from, why they were made, what they're about, what they represent, as I was using them. And it was a really exciting kind of shift in my practice. And it was also a really interesting shift because I was also thinking about why I was making drawings of women in the way that I was. And I was looking for reasons to kind of shift my ideas, shift my imagery. And this seemed like a natural and a very fluid way to move out of a certain kind of imagery and into something else. And then back into some other imagery that I was making, just to kind of see what working with objects like this and images like this, how they can sort of change the way that I'm making drawings of men and women in my studio.
So Zoe, next question for you is, how did you meet Sib?
So I was looking for a life-size African statue to take to Terrain, which is an outdoor exhibition space outside of Chicago in Oak Park, Illinois. And so I had been scouring every antique store within a 50-mile radius of Baltimore. And Sib, who's in the middle, popped up on my monitor. And so I drove about an hour north of Baltimore to this tiny antique store. And when I walked in and saw her, I was quite taken. And it was one of the first times that I was looking in the eye of someone or something, because I'm 60 inches tall and I very rarely meet people who are my height. I'm always looking above me at everyone. And so when I saw her, I was so surprised. We had the same hairdo. I used to have this really long hair that I wore in these big knots, these locks that I wore in knots. We were looking eye to eye, and she was taking up about the same amount of space that I actually took up. Like our shoulders were in the same space, our bellies were in the same space. And it was so surprising to see her. And I felt like I was looking at myself. It was the strangest experience. And I'm a twin. I have a twin. And I'm looking at her and I felt like she was my twin stranger. And so that was really thrilling. And so I was blown away, and I thought, I need to make work about her. And I don't have any self-portraits, and she's my self-portrait. And so anytime I work with her, she's a stand-in for me.
I have met Tib, and it's really when I see her, features that I think growing up were not necessarily celebrated.
Mm-hmm.
I see the beauty of them in her. I see, like you were saying, I see 2 cornrows going back. I see beautiful eyes and lips and nose and ample breast and thighs, right? And so I love that centering of seeing yourself in her.
Yes. You know, yeah. I want to see myself in spaces that I go to. You know, when I walk into a room, it's important that, and I think that many people, especially people of color and women of color, it's important that when we walk into a room, we see other people who look like us in those spaces, right?
Well, I agree with you. And I will say that when I walked into Renditions, your exhibition with Cultural DC and the Mobile Art Gallery, I felt like I was seeing not only myself, but my friends, like my mom, my sister, my auntie. I felt like I saw everyone in that room.
Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. Good. I'm glad. Yes, because she is family. She's family, right?
She really is family. Mm-hmm. I think we might have a view of the exhibition for those who have not been able to venture there. But you're still able to see the virtual gallery exhibition online. And I think that link has been provided to you in the chat. But Zoe, will you walk us through the exhibition?
Yeah, so on the left is so this is the whole show. And it is in basically a pod. And it's so surprising. You think that you might not be able to use a space this size, and you can. What a great challenge. It was like a brilliant challenge. And so the piece on the left is called COO, which stands for Country of Origin. And so there are currently about 47 masks in total in this series, but on the wall there are 39. And there are 6 distinct styles of masks, from the Fang, Bembe, I have to write it down, the Luba, the Lega, and it represents 3 countries: the Republic of Cameroon, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Gabonese Republic. And they're painted in very bright colors, pop colors, because I was thinking about abstraction and the way that color can flatten the identities of these masks, or the specifics of these masks. And I think about how even people are generalized when people first see them, right? When people see me, they might generalize me. They might say, oh, she's a Black woman, right? Depending on how I am gendered because of the way that what I'm wearing. And so I find that really interesting, this kind of shorthand that's used. And they're also made out of plastic, because I'm also thinking about about mass producing objects and having a lot of people. I think that this work addresses labor, the labor of actually making them, something that is cheaply made, something that is turned into a commodity, a material that's malleable, but also a material that, even though it might not be valued, it's resilient, it's really difficult to get rid of. And so they still occupy space. This material occupies space.
Can we see a close-up of some of the?
Yeah. So here they are in these really super bright colors, and all the details of the masks are translated on them. And some of them have, some of them were covered with, like originally covered with plastic wrap so that you can kind of see some of the seams and lines. But yeah, they have retained the details of the original. But even though they are replicas, they are renditions of the original, they still have these slight changes, slight shifts that make them all unique.
And then I just want to make sure that we're able to go over everything, because I know that time is ticking away a little bit. And yes, the rest of the exhibition.
Yeah. So this is Sib. So these are 3 of her on the left-hand side. There's 6 of them in total. And they are made out of plastic, essentially, a kind of expanding plastic foam. And they're painted in versions of black and blue and really shiny. They are tar. They look like tar. They are also black and blue, like bodies are black and blue from either being resilient or having gone through some kind of other kind of struggles. But they're also of a pregnant, it's a pregnant figure. It's a pregnant woman, which I think is really important, for this particular statue and for this object, for this series. And what's behind it is this piece called Branch of Knowledge, which is another piece in the Compromise series that is about my grandmother's property. Yeah.
And if we can move to the next slide, just so we can see a little bit more detail. And again, with the masks, like coming from the top of the work, and her grounding the work, her grounding the work is quite tremendous.
Yeah, what I love about this exhibit too is that there are 3 distinct layers of it. So you have the wall of masks on one side that and that's facing the Sib statues, and the Sib statues are standing in front of, and almost in a protecting stance in front of this large collage of a woman who is holding up this thicket and this branch of knowledge with other masks behind. So there's this thing that keeps happening, or the work is talking with each other. And so the work, they are confronting each other, they're talking with each other. But
then there's also like this honoring as well.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Yeah. And I think like that, this becomes a curious thing for me in the work, is where something that is 3-dimensional might be more abstracted than something that is flat and highly detailed or photographic, right? And even the way that I think people are thought about and looked at and understood as in a very sort of cursory way, or in a way where people are kind of unpack themselves and you understand them because you spent time looking and talking.
Yeah, that's what I see. Like the more that you sit with the work, the more things are revealed to you in the sculptures as well as in the collage pieces.
Yeah.
And then there's the final work of the show.
So this, oh my gosh, so this print is one of 20, and each print is uniquely embellished, and it's called Rendition. And it's a screen print that was produced by artists and printmakers, Amelia Hankin and Yar Kaporalin, exclusively for Cultural DC. And I'm so excited about this print. This show though is an example of working in a variety of media that I know nothing about. Like I know nothing about, and it's really cool. So yeah, so this is of the statue. It's a photo of the statue, and it is, or an image of the statue surrounded by this lush greenery, the kind of greenery that I use in a lot of my large scale collages. And I didn't say this at the very beginning, and I meant to, is that a lot of the, especially the collage elements that I use are taken from something that is this size. So I'm sourcing from stickers that you can get at Michael's and AC Moore, right? And then I take them and I blow them up and then use them in the same way that I might use them in a smaller collage.
What I love about the show and the work is that it's accessible. If you think about the placement of the mobile gallery at a space in Washington, D.C. called Union Market, which is a marketplace where all different types of people come in and out of. And so I am always interested in having arts accessible, because to a lot of people, especially the fine arts, they seem to be so distant from you, so far away, like you have to crack this barrier in order to have access. Mm-hmm. And when I think about this work in particular, I really am excited that a lot of work by fine artists is sometimes inaccessible to the average person. And I love that this allows people, no matter where you are, to have access to your work. So that something that struck me, and I was very excited about that.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. There are so many points of entry for this work, I think, too. Not only because of where it is, but the kinds of images that are being used, right? And a great thing that happened when I was at the gallery before it was on lockdown is a visitor came in and said, "Gosh, that looks really familiar. How do I know this?" And we just started talking, and we started talking about scrapbooking, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I used to have a sticker collection when I was a kid. I scrapbook too." And I was like, "Yes, so did I. I have tons of stickers. I probably have every tree sticker, every horse sticker imaginable."
No, and so Zoe, I want to make sure that there's space for other people to ask questions. I know the chat was going crazy, and they're quite few. So, okay. Christy, please take it away.
Sure. So, yeah, this was fantastic, ladies. Thank you. So let's jump in. So we just got a question while we're on the print. Somebody asked about the significance of the castle, or if there is one in the print.
So that's a Disney castle. I'm from Florida. Disney World is huge, right? It's large and in charge, right? But I also think that, that is a sign of leisure and aspiration, which is deeply tied to class, right? Access. It's all about access. And I also think about things like, who is able to, take time off to go to places like this, right? Disney also has a really tricky history in the way that it's represented folks of color, Black folks, right? And so I think that Disney is such a huge part of my own history. Disney World, Disneyland, I've been to both of them. And it's tricky to have a fondness for, I'm sorry, guys, a fondness for the kinds of images that have come out of that institution, and also have this very complicated relationship as a Black American to this particular institution.
Another kind of question around, as we're looking at trees, where does the idea of adapting a forest environment to your pieces come from? Because certainly that's a theme through a lot of them.
Where does that come from?
Yeah, the forest.
Yeah, so the forest. So my grandmother was surrounded by the woods. So it comes from that. I'm really trying to recreate that density, the density that I remember of her property in my head. I also grew up in an area that had a lot of woods. I grew up in, I went to junior high and high school in northern Maine, and it was just farmland and woods and the military. So, I think about these kinds of landscapes. These are the landscapes I particularly like. Mm-hmm.
I think we'll take, we've got a couple more questions. I have a feeling these might be big questions, but I will give them to you and let you think about it. So thinking back to your family, somebody very early on asked about your grandmother's namesake and what it means as an artist to take on her name, live up to her legacy, but also take on your own name and create your own identity. See, I knew that was going to be kind of a big one.
So my first name is my grandmother's name and my first name is hers. And, I don't think I could ever fill those shoes. I don't have the same kind of conditions in my life that required her to make the decisions that she did. So, to answer that, I don't know that I can ever do that. But what I can do is something that she promised, which was work extremely hard to get the kind of life that I'd like to live. And so I think that that's what she did. She worked hard so she could have the life that she wanted and create that opportunity for her children and her kids. So, so in that regard, I'm doing what she wanted.
That's great. I think we'll leave it there because that's one of my favorite kind of parts to your work. And so I just want to thank you both. This has been so fantastic. For those of you, again, that have not had a chance to see Zoe's exhibition Rendition, you can go to culturaldc.org and see the 3D tour narrated by Zoe. And you can also see images of the print that you see on the screen. So thank you all for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you. Everyone stay safe.